So you're having a little conversation with someone, just a little friendly debate, and out pops the line, well, you shouldn't judge. That statement in itself is a judgment. You had to assess something that I'm saying or doing in order to arrive at the conclusion that I am making a judgment. There's actually a bit more nuance to that statement, but we'll get into that later in the video. For now, we are going to be drowning out all of the noise surrounding the relationship between Christians and judgment to see what the Bible really has to say about it. Because, from the example I've just given, it's pretty much impossible to avoid judgment for anyone. We use it to determine how we pick our friends, who we choose as our spouse, who we accept criticism from, who we accept praise from. Judgment is a necessary tool to life. But is there a proper time and method to using it? That's what we're going to get into. Arguably, the most popular verse brought up around this topic is Matthew 7:1, where Jesus says, "Do not judge, so that you will not be judged." Now, a lot of people stop here and just use this segment. That's what breeds a lot of confusion around its meaning. So I'm going to go ahead and read the rest of the passage so we can get the full context of what Jesus is saying. Verse 2, "For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' and look, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." So just from verse 5, you can see Jesus is giving permission to judge, but there's sort of a prerequisite to it. So he's not condemning the act of judging, but the manner and the intention with which you do it. He's condemning a hypocritical judgment. Now, the Greek word for hypocrite, which is the original language of the New Testament, actually translates to an actor. And in Greek theater at this time, actors wore masks whenever they played their characters. So Jesus is calling out a person who puts on a false appearance, who pretends to be someone else in order to gain some sort of public approval or perception of themselves. He's condemning a judgment that comes from this illusion of moral or righteous superiority and condemns other people's sins. There is no intention of helping that other person, but rather helping their own egos. And that's dangerous for both people. The teachings of Jesus are truly timeless. Hypocrisy in the Christian church is still such a present problem today. At times, it seems like nobody judges Christians faster than other Christians. And it's sometimes the reason people walk away from the church or the Christian faith altogether. Jesus is aware of the severity of this problem, which is why he's calling it out. But luckily for us, Jesus isn't just pointing it out, but he's offering a solution for how to avoid it. And that is to examine yourself first. I was thinking more about this, and a lot of times for me, judgment comes from a place of insecurity or jealousy. I want what that person has, or anger, or just my own stubbornness to not get to know that other person and why they do or believe what they do. And it's so easy to do, and it feels good because it's sort of a way to protect myself. I automatically assume a position of superiority, but it gets me to a point where I almost delight in calling out other people's sins, but justifying my own. I remember once hearing a pastor say, "Your sin always looks a lot worse when other people do it." And boy, truer words have not been spoken. I cringe sometimes hearing the things that people say to other people when I've just said exactly the same the day before. So remove your log first, and then you can see clearly, your vision won't be obstructed, and you can rebuke a brother. And the last verse in this passage is further proof of that. Verse 6 says, "Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces." So the language used here of holy and pearls must mean that this type of judgment is valuable to God. He doesn't want you to waste it on people who won't understand or appreciate it. And in order to do that, you have to make a judgment about the person you were talking to. There are other instances throughout the New Testament that instruct Christians in the type of judgment they are to use. For example, in John 7, Jesus is teaching at the Feast of the Tabernacle, and the last time he was here, he healed a man on the Sabbath day. Now, the religious leaders, as soon as they figure this out, hold up the law of Moses against Jesus and say, "Hey, the Sabbath is strictly a day of rest, and you just broke that." Now, Jesus calls out their hypocrisy. In verse 19, he says, "Has not Moses given you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why do you seek to kill me?" God created the law of Moses specifically for the Jewish people. Yet even with this written out code for how to live a holy life, they still can't do it. Jesus, who the law was not written for, has not even broken it. So this accusation is saturated with hypocrisy. In fact, the Jewish leaders would perform a circumcision if a child's 8th day of life, which according to the ceremonial law was the day in which he's supposed to be circumcised, if that 8th day falls on the Sabbath day. And Jesus calls them out on this too. He says, if a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses will not be broken, are you angry with me because I made an entire man well on the Sabbath? So if it's holy and just to perform a circumcision, which focuses on just a small part of a person's body and is only a physical symbol of purification, is it not even more holy for me to make an entire man's body well on the Sabbath and perform a circumcision of the heart, a spiritual transformation? Now here's how it ends. Jesus tells them, do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. So Matthew 7 begins with judge not, and John 7 ends with judge with righteous judgment. So clearly there has to be two different types of judgment because the Bible does not contradict itself. In Matthew 7, Jesus is calling out the hypocritical judgment, and in John 7, he's commanding the righteous judgment. One more common example brought up around this topic of judgment, usually to argue against it, is the story of the adulterous woman. This is in John chapter 8. Verse 3 says, the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. So what do you say? This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. So two things by which they're judging. The law of Moses, which Jesus has just showed them in the previous chapter that they can't keep, and to set up a trap in order to catch Jesus in a transgression. The Pharisees really don't give up, do they? And Jesus, knowing the intentions of the heart, flips the script and he says, let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. This may be the first time the Pharisees are actually forced to confront their sin and respond to it. One by one, they all start walking away. And after the last one's gone, Jesus looks at the woman and he asks her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. This is a powerful example of Jesus' mercy. But as much as we would like it to stop here, it doesn't quite, because Jesus says this to her next. Go, and from now on, sin no more. Jesus is not dismissing her behavior. Jesus is not accepting her behavior. In fact, there is a judgment made in between the lines here. In order for Jesus to determine that she has been living in sin, he has to make a judgment beforehand. And he's not breaking the Mosaic law either, because according to that law, there has to be 2 or 3 witnesses present in order to charge someone for a crime. All the witnesses have left. Therefore, this woman cannot be legally charged for adultery. So Jesus is not judging her according to the Mosaic law. He's judging her according to his moral law. He sees the state of her eternal soul at stake here. He sees the person that she could be and the fullness and the joy that she could have in life. So, is the Bible commanding Christians not to judge? No. But it is commanding Christians to use the right type of judgment. Examine your own life first. Are you guilty of the same thing for which you're about to call out in a brother? And then examine your intention. Are you aiming for condemnation or counsel and correction? Do you have that person's best interest in mind or your own? Judge in a way you would like God to judge you at the end of your life. With patience, with discernment, with mercy, with gentleness, believing the best about another person. Love believes all things. And then apply that same standard to your own life. Now, what can you do next time you're in a conversation and someone plays the judge not card? If their intent really is to honor the Bible's teachings, then this can be the perfect segue into that conversation of, okay, let's do it. Let's dive in. Let's see what the Bible really has to say on this topic. If it is to avoid accountability for something, the judge not is a way to really dead end any conversation. I would then assess, what is my relationship with this person? Am I in a place to speak into their life? Is this someone who would accept these pearls? Or their concern might not even be the fact that I am judging, but that the judgment I am making might be hurting the other person. That hurt that I'm inflicting, that's what they see as wrong. When ironically, I might be judging because I think what the other person is doing is hurting themselves. So start with that common ground. We both agree that if a person is doing something wrong that is hurting them, we should call it out and then go from there. And this is also why having an understanding of scripture is so important, so that you can continue this conversation if appropriate. But first you got to determine whether or not you should continue. And to that I say, use your judgment.